never imagined I'd be afraid to walk into a church. The morning sun was already high, glinting off the stained glass as I stood outside St. Andrew's Chapel, fingers curled tightly around my bag strap. My palms were sweating, though the September breeze was cool. It was the first Sunday I'd come back in months. I told myself it was just another service, just another step toward healing, but it wasn't. I had called ahead to volunteer. The church secretary, kind and soft-spoken, said the priest was open to guest testimonies during the reflection hour. I had rehearsed my words all night, about how faith had pulled me back from the edge, about how I found God not in scripture, but in silence, in solitude, in surviving. It wasn't polished, but it was real, and yet, the moment I stepped through those heavy wooden doors, I felt it, that shift. That silence that isn't reverent, but suspicious. Father Morales stood near the altar, arranging papers. He looked up, squinted slightly, and his expression didn't change. No welcome. No smile. Just flatness. He walked toward me slowly, his robe brushing the floor, and asked, "Can I help you?" "I'm here for the testimony," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The secretary said I could. Before I finished, he raised his hand slightly. His voice was low, firm. "This isn't the place for someone like you." I blinked. I thought I misheard. I asked, "I'm sorry?" He didn't repeat it. He just nodded toward the back of the church. "You can take a seat if you'd like. But there won't be space for you at the front today." There it was again, someone like you. I turned, slowly, scanning the rows of pews. The few people already seated were glancing at me, some curious, others uncomfortable. I must have looked as stunned as I felt. My heart thudded in my ears. I wanted to ask, "What do you mean? What makes me unworthy of standing up there?" But the words stayed in my throat. I wasn't wearing anything controversial. I wasn't loud. I wasn't preaching. I was just me. Me with my past. Me with my baggage. Me with a story that wasn't clean or easy, but it was mine. I stood there for a second too long. The priest had already turned his back to me, returning to his preparation. I walked out. The doors groaned as they shut behind me. The air outside felt sharper now, biting at my skin. My legs carried me toward the parking lot without thinking. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt hollow, and then I heard it, behind me, muffled through the stained glass, organ music. Starting. The service was beginning. People were standing. Voices rose in prayer. A gathering of the faithful. A place I wasn't welcomed. I sat on the curb beside my car, trembling. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. How did it go? Were they kind? I stared at the screen. I didn't know what to answer. I hadn't expected a parade. But I also hadn't expected to be told, calmly, directly, that I didn't belong. And not by a stranger in the pews. By the priest himself. The man who speaks of grace and inclusion every Sunday. I thought of all the things I could have said in that moment. God didn't write your guest list. You preach about forgiveness. Why are you afraid of mine? I came here to speak. Not to be saved. But I didn't say any of them. I froze, like I always do when shame wraps its cold fingers around my throat. I looked up at the chapel again. That same stained glass Jesus looked down at me, arms open, eyes sad. I felt stupid for coming. For hoping, but that feeling, it didn't last, because beneath the sting, something else was rising. Slowly, stubbornly. Not rage. Not revenge. Just clarity. If that place wasn't meant for someone like me, then maybe it was time I stopped asking for permission to speak. Maybe it was time I found a mic. Maybe it was time I told my story anyway. I didn't go home right away. I sat in my car for 22 minutes. Yes, I counted. The engine was off, the air was still, and the only sound was the ticking of the dashboard clock. I watched a family walk into the chapel, 2 kids in stiff shoes, a woman in a powder blue dress holding her husband's arm. They didn't see me. Or maybe they did, and looked away. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger needs direction, and I was still drifting in the fog of that one phrase, "This isn't the place for someone like you." What kind of someone was I? Someone who struggled. Someone who doubted. Someone who didn't fit the mold they built. Around holiness, I drove home slowly, like the road itself was fragile. Every red light felt like a checkpoint. Are you okay? Are you okay now? How about now? When I walked into my apartment, I didn't take off my shoes. I went straight to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and set it down without drinking. Then I pulled out my laptop. Not to scroll. Not to escape. Just to open a blank page, new document. Untitled. Cursor blinking. I stared at it, and then I started typing. Today, I was told I didn't belong in the house of God. That sentence came out first. And it cracked something open. Everything I had been holding in for months, maybe years, poured out. I wrote about my first Sunday school teacher, Mrs. Ellison, who told me at 8 years old that God sees everything, but especially the things you do wrong. I wrote about the nights I prayed under my blanket, hoping God would fix the way I felt. I wrote about the day I stopped praying, because silence hurt less than being ignored. I wrote about my father leaving when I was 15 and my mother covering the mirrors for 3 weeks because she couldn't look at what he left behind. I wrote about shame. And silence. And hunger, for peace, for love, for some kind of holy that didn't feel like a closed gate. And then I wrote about yesterday. The phone call. The hopeful yes. The bag I packed. The words I practiced. The steps I took toward that altar. And that one line that stopped it all: "This isn't the place for someone like you." I typed it again. And again. I highlighted it. Bold. Italic. Bigger font. The words looked ridiculous in size 36 Arial. Like a warning label on a fragile package. But I wasn't fragile. Not anymore. By the time I stopped typing, it was past midnight. I had 27 pages of memories, questions, confessions, and quiet rage. My fingers hurt. My eyes were red. But my chest felt lighter. I saved the file. Named it something dramatic, my voice, and stared at the screen. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. I just knew I couldn't keep it to myself. I closed the laptop and looked around. My apartment was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of someone arguing on the street below. I lit a candle on the windowsill, not for the aesthetics. For the symbolism. One light. In a place that felt dark. That mattered to me. Then I opened my phone and typed a message to myself: "You are allowed to exist in sacred spaces. You are not their shame. You are not their fear. You are not what they pretend not to see." I didn't send it to anyone. I just needed to say it to someone. Even if that someone was me. And then, before bed, I did one more thing. I recorded a voice memo. Just my voice. No video. No script. If they won't let me speak there, I'll speak somewhere else. If the mic is sacred, then I'll make my own altar. If the story isn't welcome, then maybe the story needs to be louder. I pressed stop, and I knew I was going to tell it, all of it. The next morning, I woke up before the sun.my apartment was still dark, except for the orange sliver of light creeping in under the curtains. I didn't move right away. I just lay there, listening to my breath and the faint hum of the city coming to life. There was a single thought playing in my head, over and over: do it scared. I'd read that somewhere, probably in one of those self-help posts you scroll past at 2 a.m., but this time, it felt personal. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and looked around my small bedroom. My laptop was still on the desk from the night before, slightly open, as if waiting for me. I walked over, opened it fully, and scrolled through the document I'd written. Every word still burned. But I didn't want to just write it anymore. I wanted to speak it. So I went to the kitchen, made coffee with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, and started prepping. Not mentally, visually. If I was going to tell my story, I wanted it to feel real, raw, but not chaotic. Honest, not performative. I moved my small bookshelf closer to the window to act as a stand. I placed a few books on top to get the height right. I leaned my phone against a ceramic mug, angled just enough to catch my face in natural light. I didn't put on makeup. I didn't fix my hair. I wore a plain gray hoodie. Nothing about it was polished. Because the truth wasn't either. I sat in front of the camera and took a breath so deep it felt like I was preparing for surgery. Then I hit record. Hi. I don't really know how to start this, but I need to. My voice cracked immediately. I didn't stop. Yesterday, I was told I didn't belong in my own place of worship. The priest looked at me and said, "This isn't the place for someone like you." And maybe you've heard those words too, not in a church, but in school, at work, at home. I talked for 24 minutes straight. No cuts. No edits. I told them about the chapel. About the empty pews. About how the priest didn't yell, how rejection can sound soft and still break you. I told them about sitting on the curb outside with my phone buzzing, unable to answer my mother's text. I didn't ask for sympathy. I didn't make accusations. I just said what happened and how it felt. We talk about love in churches. We talk about forgiveness. But when someone like me walks in, someone messy, someone uncertain, someone with a past, we're met with silence. Or worse, dismissal. And then I said the line that would become the title: so if that wasn't the place for someone like me, then maybe this is. Maybe right here, right now, this is where I speak. I finished with a whisper. To anyone who's ever been told they don't belong, this story is for you. And maybe, in telling it, I'll finally believe it myself. I stopped the recording. My hands were shaking. I watched it back once. Not to fix anything, just to feel it. My face looked tired. My voice wavered. My eyes were glassy the entire time. It was honest. I uploaded it to YouTube with a title that felt like a scream wrapped in calm. The priest said, "This isn't the place for someone like you." So I took the mic and told my story. I paused over the publish button. My heart was pounding. My mouth was dry. I thought about all the ways this could go wrong. The judgment. The comments. The silence, but I thought of that empty chapel. Of how it felt to be turned away for simply existing, and then I thought, what if one person out there hears this and feels less alone? So I clicked publish. The video was live, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't expect anyone to watch it. When I closed the laptop after hitting publish, I fully believed I'd wake up to 10 views, 9 of them probably mine. I went to bed feeling a strange kind of peace, like I had finally said something out loud I'd kept buried for years, but when I opened my phone the next morning, I couldn't breathe. Point 3 for 82 views, dozens of comments. Some long, some short. Some that just said, same. Me too. You're not alone. I sat up in bed. Phone in one hand, tears welling in my eyes. These weren't internet strangers, they were people who had felt it. Who had sat in the back rows of churches, or classrooms, or boardrooms, knowing they weren't welcome but still showing up. People who had once believed they had to earn space in the world, and then, a message popped up that made my chest tighten. From St. Andrew's Chapel admin Father Morales would like to speak with you directly, if you're open to it. We're deeply sorry for how yesterday unfolded. I stared at the screen. Not angry. Not eager. Just, still, they had seen the video. Of course they had. Part of me wanted to respond immediately, to say everything I hadn't managed to say when I stood in front of that altar, but instead, I got up. I made coffee. I answered a few comments, carefully, softly. I told people thank you. I told them they mattered. Because they did, and then I wrote back to the chapel. I'm open to talk. But not behind closed doors. If we speak, it's on record. Because my story isn't private anymore. They didn't reply that day. Or the day after. But honestly, it didn't matter, because something else had happened. I started getting emails from people across the country, inviting me to join discussion panels, to speak at youth groups, to record a podcast. Not because I was a theologian. Not because I had answers. But because I had said something real. Point 1. Message stood out. We watched your video in our community group last night. For the first time, people shared things they never said before. You gave us language for the wounds we couldn't name. That's when I knew, this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about us, the ones who were told we weren't the right kind. The ones who thought holiness had a dress code. The ones who stayed quiet for too long. I kept posting, not sermons. Not rants. Just stories. Mine. Others. Honest, trembling, messy truths about faith in pain and healing. 3 weeks later, I walked past St. Andrew's on a Sunday morning. A greeter at the door smiled at me, not recognizing my face, maybe. Or maybe pretending not to. I nodded politely and kept walking, because I had found my place. It wasn't between pews. It wasn't behind a pulpit. It was right where I was, speaking, sharing, connecting, and maybe that's what sacred really means. Encerramento emotional par video, when the priest said, "This isn't the place for someone like you," he meant it as a dismissal. But he gave me the greatest gift. He forced me to make space for myself, and for others. And that space? It's growing every day.